Welcome, I'm David Matlin, and tonight on ILTV Insider, we explore the moment we are in, the great uncertainty and anxiety that surrounds whatever may happen next in Israel and with the war against the Iranian regime. It is this moment that we dive into here on Insider, joined by two guests who have their heads in the game as much as anyone I know, to try to shed some light on the challenging and uncertain situation we all find ourselves in. So I introduce, joined by Dan Perry, former editor and bureau chief at the Associated Press, and IDF Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch from the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. So what's the next phase? When will it be upon us?
It's impossible to say. I think most people in the world, whether or not they support the war, certainly people in the Western alliance who are pretending not to support the war, support the goals of either bringing down a regime or compelling these maniacs to misbehave less. Now, bringing down a regime with air power only is extremely difficult unless you rely eventually on an internal coup, hard to envision, but one hopes, or protests eventually resuming and somehow taking over the country. Difficult to do when the regime is so murderous. Compelling them to do very much is almost impossible when they seem credibly and convincingly suicidal. So we have a problem. In America, the war is very unpopular, and even though Trump makes a semi-convincing pretense of being indifferent, and indeed he can't run again, so maybe to a degree he is indifferent, the midterms are a problem, and it's difficult to envision in any normal circumstance the war being resumed as a kinetic operation, as Morris says. However, Trump is not a normal politician. He may roll the dice anyway. I think what we're more likely to see is a continuation of the blockade in an effort to establish a true chokehold where the regime simply runs out of everything and protests do resume. And I would only hope and indeed envision that attempts are being made to find below the radar methods of organizing something that resembles a coup, should that occur, and certainly some way to prevent a massacre from happening again. It's all very delicate, very complex. You need two things. You need nuance and complex understandings, which I don't think the current American regime has, but you also need determination, which it just might.
Maurice, on that, on President Trump's position, which obviously all these, conversations seem to come back around to. What's your read on his, at least, broadcast of indifference? He tries to exude indifference here to the negotiated outcome, not important to him whether it happens or not. Nonetheless, do you think he's completely tied to them at this point, the sort of diplomatic process?
I think we should shy away from underestimating President Trump. I think that every single one of his moves until now has been cold, calculated, and very much prepared. He started the war after the massive buildup of forces at an unexpected time. I think his ability to throw out almost haphazardly different statements on Truth Social Media to confuse everyone as to what exactly is going on. But behind it, there is an entire mechanism that's working. And to say that President Trump is just impetuous and uncalculated is, I think, very, very far from the truth.
I have to say that one should not be a blind acolyte and just always assume that whatever seems haphazard, chaotic, ignorant, and reckless surely has a plan. I would certainly shy away from underestimating his determination, like I say. I respect the fact that he went ahead and attacked Iran. Which, who knows, maybe Biden or Kamala Harris would not have had the courage to do. So I respect that. Maybe. On the other hand, a man who has said so many manifestly false and ridiculous things, stupid things and corrupt things, as Trump has done, shouldn't be overestimated either. In
the context of this war, how do you parse, I'll just take Truth Social for a moment. How do you parse, what we should take seriously, what we shouldn't?
You can't. And obviously, to a degree, we have here impetuousness and recklessness. To another degree, we have here a potentially planned strategy of being difficult to predict, and from unpredictability, it may come a version of strength. I understand all this, but it's complex. We shouldn't overestimate either. And here's a very, very big mistake. The same Trump that you claim is so very calculated was outrageously and disgracefully threatening to attack Denmark in January. And this after belittling and insulting the European allies and preferring Putin to Zelensky and saying categorically nonsensical things like that Ukraine started the war and that Zelensky's a dictator, not Putin. This came pretty close to demolishing the Western alliance, which is why, at this point, and I do not respect the Europeans for this, but at this point, Trump has found it difficult to bring the Europeans on side because in Europe, in public opinion in Europe, he's seen as a demon. What on earth did he gain with his stupid Greenland obsession, with his reckless suggestions that he might take Greenland by force from a NATO ally? The result today is that we have a more difficult time opening up the Strait of Hormuz. This is your brilliant calculation.
I think, Mauricio, what chances did he have, even without any of that, do you think, to bring those sides on, to bring the Europeans on side with their limited military abilities, or for the Democrats from that matter? Do you think there was a chance to message this better?
I think with the Europeans, it was almost a failed goal from the start. I think the Europeans have lost their desire, their understanding of the need for joint defense. I think their inability, their reliance on the one hand on NATO to support European existence against the Russian bear, but their inability to actually ever step up and provide any type of support for NATO, relying only on the United States.
I'm going to stop you a little bit. I don't want to drag us into a discussion about NATO.
Those are untruths, basically.
Wait, let's talk about Iran here and what the effect is on the enemy at hand right now. Iran in this moment, what we can tell, run by the IRGC more than ever before. What are their options? What do you think they're planning at this point? Is it a race to the bomb?
I think the ILGC and the Iranian regime has always had one very, very clear stated goal: to reach nuclear capabilities in order to then use those capabilities against its perceived enemies, whether it be the great Satan, the United States, or the little Satan, Israel. I think underneath that current, you also saw that I would say not even animosity, the true enemy that they saw in Saudi Arabia, their desire to possibly take over, invade Saudi Arabia. We just have to listen to them. And in the same way as Yahya Sinwar said on the 6th of April 2018, if we remember, we are going to cross the border and rip the hearts of the Jews out of their dead bodies. Had we listened to Yahya Sinwar, we would possibly have understood what was coming on the 7th of October.
You know what?
But our deafness, our inability to hear what our enemies were actually saying and to understand that what they were saying, they actually meant, was so great that we
May I interject? Yeah. Because I have a feeling the symposium might last for the entire 23 minutes. The person who didn't listen to the threats from Hamas was the very prime minister you would doubtless defend, who refused to meet with the heads of the Shin Bet, the military, and the Mossad in the months before the invasion of October 7th, for political reasons, because he assumed they supported his authoritarian, they opposed his authoritarian overhaul. Netanyahu sent money to Hamas. Netanyahu wanted Hamas in place as a balance to the Palestinian Authority, which he demonized. As for Iran,
there are a lot of people arguing that Iran's been pushed into a more hardline position.
No, that's nonsense. The Iranian regime, I don't think they're going to invade Saudi Arabia, but they certainly wanted to dominate the region. And he wanted to dominate the region through proxy militias that undermine the sovereignty of all these Arab countries. They are nothing but a bad faith player. They're a menace to the region and to their own people and to the world. At this point, if you look at what practically can be done, there is obviously a problem with the radicals that remain in charge, because the IRGC essentially staged a coup, a silent coup, and they're in charge. And they look at the world and they see the Western alliance all broken up. And this gives them succor, and it makes them brazen enough to try to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a toll booth. All right? Obviously, it might help if they saw a unified Western front. I think it's very, very critical for Trump at this point and NATO to somehow find a way to make up. Trump has to walk back all his idiotic attacks on NATO and find a way to bring NATO on side so that Iran is faced with a unified front that possibly can bring in other powers, including maybe China, where they no longer have the illusion that they can outlast the West. Essentially, the issue right now is if the U.S., backed by the West, in a better scenario, with slightly smarter prosecution of the situation, blockades Iran until Iran chokes to death the regime. Might take 2 months, might take 3 months, might take 4 months. Can it be made that the rest of the world is willing to pay the economic price for that?
Well,
the Iranians are betting that not.
They're banking on that.
The Iranians are banking that not.
They're
and what
banking
helps
on that
them,
division.
what helps them think that's a reasonable bet is the divisions they see in the West. So rather than just dumping on the Europeans like that was a hobby, we should try to bring them back on side and also find ways to talk to the Iranian opposition, the Iranian security services that are presently starting to show divisions, and also bring the Asian nations on side. In other words, whereas Trump was quite good with kinetic warfare, he was quite bad with a strategy that would have a diplomatic arm to this as well. And that is not without a price. The Iranians see that, and as a consequence of that, are basically insisting more than they should on what should be an untenable position, because militarily they have been thrashed.
Maurice, here inside Israel, I believe there's an opposite perspective here, as you touched on at the very beginning, that the ceasefire was met with great trepidation, fear, uncertainty around this, and that each day the war would continue would actually benefit Israel. How do you explain that, to many of our viewers who are looking in from the outside thinking, wow, these Israelis are out of touch?
I think the Israeli population, who has really been through war after war after war after war for the last really 78 years since Israel was established, is now fed up. We want to see an end to the wars. We want to see an end to the ability of the Iranian regime to use its own proxies in order to attack us, to directly attack us. We want to see an end to any one of these wars with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, with the Iranian regime. And stopping in the middle to allow the regime, as we did with Hamas, as we did with Hezbollah, as we did with the Houthis, doesn't bring an end to the war. We're not looking for endless cycles of more violence, of more ceasefires, of empty promises, of the JCPOA in 2015, which with its sunlight clause to allow the Iranians to get to nuclear weapons.
That is not what the JCPOA was meant to do.
To allow them
that
to
is a misrepresentation,
building their ballistic missile capabilities, which we've seen them now implemented.
Am I going to have a right to respond to this?
Stupidity.
I don't want to drag us into
which dragged us to
an
where
argument
we are.
on the JCPOA, but perhaps, Dan, add to what are you optimistic about right now? What are the upsides to Israel's position, to what's been accomplished?
Israel's position internationally is horrifically bad.
It is.
Because, contrary to what Morris says, instead of trying to finish things off in a way that is clever and that combines military means with diplomatic means and engages with the world and with the region, Israel has gone in the direction of pure use of force, where at least half the people of Israel think Netanyahu is prolonging the war to stay in power because his coalition wanted it. So Morris speaks of the need to be decisive and end the war once and for all, and instead, realistically, what Israel's doing is engaging in a forever war. With Hezbollah, for example, without the assistance of the world and the Lebanese state, you can't finish Hezbollah off because they're going to run to the north, and no one in Israel wants to occupy the entirety of Lebanon. So Israel needs to be more clever. And by the way, I agree with the goal. Hezbollah should never have been tolerated. Hamas should never have been tolerated. The Houthis should never have been tolerated. The regime in Iran should have been crushed. All this is true. However, Israel needs to go about it more cleverly. The way that Morris is proposing is nothing but brawn and very little brain. So if you ask me what I'm optimistic about, I'm optimistic about the polls. All of would show that the Israeli government, which has overseen a tremendous catastrophe, a nearly 3-year war, an isolation of Israel, and no end to hardship for the Israeli people, will be drummed out in the election that has to be held by October. That's what I find some optimism in.
So we can factor the election year in. Morris, sort of same question to you. We don't have much time left, only about 2 minutes or so, General. So what are the upsides in your mind right now? What are you optimistic about? What are you clinging to?
I'm optimistic about the fact that on every front that there has been a war, we are winning. Let's not mislead ourselves. Even though Hamas is still struggling to survive, even though Hezbollah is struggling to survive, the Iranians, the Houthis, every one of them has taken a tremendous thrashing, and all we need is a little bit more in order to finish that game. We've been so-called clever for the last 78 years. It's brought us nowhere. with
Really?
genocidal terrorists like Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran.
I
the
want
Houthis.
to respond
They only
because we're clearly
understand,
gonna run out
like
of time.
Hitler, only understand pure force.
The cleverness-
They do not
Wow.
understand the clever Jewish mind, the Western delusionism, the liberalism.
I got to
That's
respond.
not what they understand.
I got to
Daniel,
have a 30
I'll give you 30 seconds. Here we go, and then
the
it's mine.
cleverness that you so disdain has brought Israel a per capita GDP that's higher than Germany, France, and Britain. I wouldn't discount the successes of Israel that came from cleverness. As for the past 3 years, the disaster is evident. And even though, yes, on the military front, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran have all taken a thrashing, Israel's overall situation is terrible. And as for just give us another minute, Netanyahu has been saying give us another minute since basically month
I would
5
love
of
to
the
give us
war.
another minute, and we'll have to have you both back.
It's
We'll have to have
always
you
been
both back.
another minute, another month. In April 2024, he was saying we are one step from total victory.
If I had another minute, we'd carry this on.
Pathetic.
We'll have you both back. Maurice Hirsch and Dan Perry, always enlightening to speak to both of you, and I appreciate your time with us today.